Okay. Can you hear me? Audible. So yeah, so I'm going to be presenting this paper that I wrote with Mark Goldman. So the actual title of the paper is "Tax Options for Financing the New Social Instruments Back at Home in South Africa." So as you all know that I don't have like a lot of time, so I'm just going to be as brief and as frank as possible. Uh, so the first thing that I'm going to try and communicate here is that what is happening on the ground, and then secondly, tell you about the questions that we had, and then how we try to answer those questions. That will be briefly because of time, but then I mean I'm like you welcome to just come after me after the conference to ask me a few questions about like the technicals of how we went about achieving this or trying to answer the questions, and then the results and conclusion will be the last part of my presentation. So I'll skip this. The time. So the first thing that you probably want to know is that more than half of the country is living below the upper bound poverty line. One third of the country, well, the working age population is unemployed. 45%, 44% of the youth is unemployed, and I think, as everyone know in this room, well, South Africa is the most unequal country in the world, with a Gini coefficient that is, well, 0.65 or 0.67, depending on who you ask. So, well, on the ground, the situation is dire. And then moving on, well, back in 2020, as if things are not already tough, COVID-19 came and then it slashed our GDP by 6% and then also slashed our employment by 14%. So that is bad. So the point I'm trying to drive home here is that, well, it is bad, right? Like the socioeconomic ills are really bad. So that's the point I'm trying to drive home. And then the reason I'm mentioning the COVID-19 pandemic is because as a result of the 19 pandemic, the South African government introduced SRD grant, of which is called the Social Relief of Distress Grant. The goal of the grant was very simple: combats the negative impacts of the grant of the pandemic. And the grant has gone to help a lot of people. As we speak, approximately 9 million people are getting the grant. So, and it's reducing poverty and inequality significantly. We've written quite a few papers detailing how the grant is impacting people in the country. But then the grant, well, as you will see, well, firstly, it's pivotal to this paper. The grant has a few, say, shortfalls. The first one is the means test, of which was introduced few months after the first version of the grant. So the first thing that you want to know about the means test is that, well, I'll give you a simple example. So this is how it works. So the government will go to your bank and ask you how much do you earn, and then if you earn above the threshold, then you will not get the grant, and then if you're earning below the threshold, well, you'll get the grant. But the problem with that is that the banks cannot distinguish between incomes. So if I send, say, my spouse or my mother some money, the bank cannot see if this is an income or this is being sent by me, right? So what happens is that the banks end up double counting, and then the government double counts, and then people get excluded by mistake. So it excludes a lot of people. That is the point that I'm trying to communicate here. The second part is that the grant has not kept up with inflation. That's very simple. And then currently, we do not know when the grant will end, or it will be forever. So there's a lot of uncertainty about the grant. And this is one of, say, 8 grants in South Africa. A lot of grants, we have a lot of grants, and they do help. They reduce poverty and inequality. Another simple example is that almost 50% of the grant of the population in South Africa is receiving at least one grant. The poorest decile income, 50% of it is derived from grants. And we're reducing a lot of, as I've been saying, a lot of poverty and inequality. So the point I'm trying to drive home here is that grants reduce poverty and inequality, and they're helping a lot of people. A lot of people are depending on them. Now, with that being said, on the other side of the budget sheet, well, we have a deficit, right, of which is bad. So 370 billion rand, so this is the recent budget, 370 billion rand in deficit. Our debt is 77% of our GDP. We're paying 500 billion rands on debt financing. Just to put that into context, we only paying approximately 400 billion rands on education. So, I mean, that's obviously not good, right? We're paying more for financing the debts than paying for education. So that is a problem. So that, well, as a result of that, we came up with a few questions. Well, this paper is building on top of other papers that Maya and I wrote about the SRD grant. So in those papers, what we're trying to figure out is how do this grant help without looking at the financing side of the puzzle. So with this paper, what we're trying to do is, well, the first question that we had is, well, how do you structure the social security system such that it achieve the highest reduction in poverty? And then secondly, which tax instruments can we use to achieve this goal? And then lastly, of which, well, to me at least, this is the most important part of it, is what is the net impact of this whole thing, right? Because if you increase tax, no, if you give you a grant, that will increase your income, but then if you increase the VAT, that will decrease your income. So we want to measure the net impact of this whole thing. So we want to look at this thing from a holistical view, if you like. So the transfer instruments that we used, so the first one was the SRD, the social relief of distress. The first thing that we wanted to see is what happens when we increase the SRD by, well, from 270 to 510 rands. So that's the first one. And then the second one, what happens when we introduce a universal basic income grant, of which for some reason it is a controversial topic in South Africa. I don't understand why, because, well, as I said, a lot of people are poor, a lot of people are depending on this grant. So it is a controversial topic, but we're not going to delve on that. What will happen if you decide to do that and cancel everything else? And then lastly, what happens when we introduce working age basic income grant? So those are three things that we trying to figure out. And then so these will be the costs. The one thing that I want you to look at here is that the working age big costs more, well, as a grant itself, because it is not a system, but then the universal basic income grant cost more as a grant itself, and then the working age big cost more because it is part of the system. So that's the one thing I wanted you to take out of this slide. And then on the tax side, what we're thinking of doing is increasing the personal income tax, reduce the rebate. We call this a clawback mechanism, but we can discuss this after the conference. And then secondly, increase the value-added tax. Well, South Africa tried to do this and it did not work. So I guess maybe you can skip that. And then the surcharge income, like what will happen if you introduce surcharge income. So like these are three ways we think of, well, getting the money basically. And then so these will be the options, just like skip. So what this is doing is how much are we getting per tax instrument, like just individually. But then we do not, well, in our paper, what we're doing is we measuring everything as a package. So there's package one, just increasing the SRD, package two, universal basic income grant, and then package three, working age basic income grant. So these are the packages. You see that for increasing the grant to 510, what we think we have to do in order to achieve that, we're going to increase the baseline of the PIT by 1% and the VAT by 1%, and so on. Like for universal basic income grant, this is what we think of doing in order to achieve that, and then for the working basic income grant. As we can see that we are able to get a lot of money for the SRD grant. We actually making a profit to some extent. So we needed only 42 billion, but we're now getting 58 billion, and then going down to the universal basic income grant for obvious reasons. Everyone is getting the grant, so that costs more. We're not really able to recoup everything. We're only able to get 76 billion, where we needed 3 billion. And then lastly, we're able to get some money out of the working age big package. So this is the money side of things, but this is my interest. Like I'm interested in this. I'm not sure if you can see that actually. Now I'm looking at it here. But what we're seeing here is that the net impact, the net impact of working age big reduces poverty the most, reduces poverty and inequality the most. So just like to reiterate, this is the net impact. So we factored in increasing the tax on that. So like this is the net impact. So yeah, well, so according to our analysis, the working age big will achieve the highest poverty and inequality reduction on that one. And just to stress this point, this is just our menu, if you like. Like this is how we think of playing with the tax and the transfers in order to achieve the highest poverty reduction. We stress policymakers to, I mean, they can look at the numbers themselves and try and play with their tax numbers and see. Our goal with this whole thing was to say, this is hard, but it also works. Like it's hard, but it's possible. And if you look at the net impact by deciles, we see that only the last 3 deciles are getting negative impact. And the reason behind that is because they're paying most of the tax. So here's another stat, is that in South Africa, 9% of 9% of the population is paying 40% of the tax bill, like or the tax revenue. They paying 40% of the tax revenue. So that is one of the reasons we're seeing that only the from 7th decile up until the last decile, they are the one who are getting net negative impact. So in conclusion, as I've been saying, well, what we're trying to say, what we're trying to communicate is that this is hard, but it's not impossible, right? We can do this. It's just hard. I mean, I've been hearing from the government that they're thinking of canceling the SRT, for an example. But I think that I do not think that is necessary. I think that's just an easy way out. I think this is possible. It's just hard. So these are some of the reasons why this is hard. So for an example, we're already spending a lot on social security, SRD, and also the VAT fiasco that happened. You know, there are things that are forbidding us from achieving this goal, if you like. And to make this practically and politically palatable, the government has been thinking of tying the grant to job creation and labor market participation. And Harun Borat and Tim Kohler, of which are scholars here at UNU-WIDER, wrote this excellent paper detailing how the SRD grant was able to increase labor market participation, at least in the short run. So the idea is that if we tie this to labor market, this would be more politically palatable. And then way forward, the South African government is already thinking about this, so this is good. And then lastly, which is very controversial, as a matter of fact, Maya, when I told her about this, she was really skeptical about the AI part. So the idea there is that let's say the big does not work. Let's say the government does not want the basic income grant. We have to target people. Like we have to improve our targeting way. Maybe we can use AI to do that. The reason I'm saying this is because I trained a deep learning model. I used 100 compute units, bought that with $5, and I spent like 1 day coding it. It's not a lot. And I was able to find my false negatives and false positive really close to what the government is reporting. So like that alone showed me that maybe we can use AI, maybe we can try, and maybe it might work, maybe it might not work. So it's better to try. So lastly, and this is the final one, this works, but then it's hard, and I think if you do not try, people will die, basically. And I don't think anyone wants that.